I don't care that it's well in the January. I'm still not over 2025. I want to show you my reading stats for last year because I think it's fun. Okay, so I read 265 books last year. The very first book that I finished was Sweet Surrender by Viana Onima. I'm so sorry that I don't fully know how to say that. It was really cute though, but I like her other work just a little bit better. And then the last book I read was The Everlasting, which was one of my favorite reads of the entire year. Here you can see the mood. I feel like I kind of stay fairly steady, but clearly I did get a little bit darker here towards the end of the year. I was reading some more lighthearted stuff in last January, I guess. I don't remember reading that much light stuff though. And then here you can kind of see how that reading was spread out. October was so busy and it's really reflected in my reading, and it wasn't helped by I wasn't loving anything I was reading in October. And clearly January was my best month because I just was getting hooked on everything I was reading. So I just was flying through books. Also, I didn't have a bunch of stuff to do last January. You can see I had a bunch of stuff to do in October because I do craft shows. I did, in fact, meet my reading goal, though. Then here's the genres I spent the most time with. I am unsurprised by any of this. Of course, it was mostly fantasy. That's primarily what I read. And romance is how I cleanse my brain after. Okay, and then the longest thing I read was the second Wandering Inn book. I found this series last year and I am obsessed. I am now on, I think I'm about to start book 5. But I think it's about time I found something that was longer than Wind and Truth. This is just impressive. I found something longer. And then the shortest I read was The Dispatcher. It was a really, really short audiobook. It was fine. It wasn't anything special, really. Oh, and then the average length you can see down there of what I was reading was about 400 pages, which I think really makes sense because I fluctuate between super long fantasy books and really short romances. Oh, and it took me about 5 days to finish each book. There were several books I read in a day that were just novellas, but this one says I spent the least time with it. Makes sense. This is like 60 pages at most. I think it's 50 pages. And then this is what I spent the longest with. It took me forever to read this. I was reading it like a chapter at a time, and those were kind of spread out. It took me over a month to read this. It was just a little bit dry. Okay, and these are the authors I spent the most time with. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson. I reread the Cosmere every single year like an insane person. And then next is T. Kingfisher because I read Paladin's Grace. And I'd read a couple of T. Kingfisher books before, but I read Paladin's Grace and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read this lady's whole backlog. And I am almost done with that. But she also releases like 2 or 3 books a year, so it's kind of hard. And then Emily Antoinette, I read everything that came out by her besides Phil in the Heat, which is what I'm reading right now. And for the most part, I liked what I read. Now, granted, I reread a lot of books. I should have figured out the percentage of how many of those I reread. But now Storygraph has a little reread button on it, so that should be easier to figure out for next year. But yeah, I'm pretty good at picking out what I like to read. And you can really see that here. Here's how the ratings worked out. It was mostly 5 stars over here. I rate very few things 1 and 2 stars. And then my best reading month was April, and I was just reading banger after banger that month. It was fantastic. September, I'm surprised it's not October because it was really September and October. I was just not really liking what I was reading. But I think I started rereading the Cosmere in October, so that's probably why it got bumped up. And then in January, yeah, I didn't do anything but read last January. Did I get anything else done I was supposed to? No. I explored 103 new authors, so that was exciting. And here's, I guess, 2 of those authors. Oh, 169 of the books I read, part of a series. That sounds about right to me. And this says I reread 43 books, but they didn't add the reread function yet, so that might be closer to 50 because I also reread Murderbot earlier in the year before that button was on there. So, and here's my little moods. I still don't fully understand these moods, but obviously it's adventurous and emotional because I read fantasy books. Pace, medium, is mostly medium. Right, once again, right there in the middle is mostly, my average was 400 pages a book. Now, I was very proud of this. This is the largest percentage of that nonfiction has been, and I'm hoping it'll be closer to 10% this year because I have several nonfiction books on my TBR. I really discovered a love for memoirs, especially as I am learning and trying to write my own memoir about my great-grandmother. So I am trying to read more nonfiction. So we're going to see if that's 10% by the end of this year. And then obviously I read a huge amount of genres Like, there's just so many on here. I'm not going to go through each one. I will say that it says sports on there. It's because I read Pucking Around, and that's the only reason. And Double Hit, which is a volleyball romance. Now, whenever you're like, how did you read 265 books? That's because half of them were audiobooks. Half of them were audiobooks, and some of them were really short audiobooks. That's how. Because I work basically 2 jobs and I'm a Girl Scout leader. I listen in the car. I listen to it as much as I can while I'm working. Me and my client drive around listening to audiobooks together. She loves it because she loves being read to. This is how I'm able to read so much. It's audiobooks. And then lastly, here are the other authors that were on my most read list. I read all of Dungeon Crawler Carl this year. I discovered Alex E. Harrow. I reread Murderbot. And I got even farther into Realm of the Elderlings. I plan on being caught up this year. I discovered Heather Gear. I don't really know how to say her last name. And then I also went back to Jacqueline Carey to finish up the other books in the Kushiel's universe. And then I reread Harrow Fair, so that's how Catherine Ann Kingsley got up there. So yeah. Oh, and while we're here, we'll also look at Goodreads because, yes, I use both. I use this one for validating my own opinions on books by reading reviews that agree with me, and the other one I use to get my stats. Yeah. So according to this one, the shortest book was 30 pages. I think earlier I said that was like 50. I don't remember. I read that last January. And then the longest book, yeah, was The Wandering Inn. And then I thought this was fun. This is only 2 pages off of what it said my average length was on Storygraph because Goodreads doesn't like let you pick editions.